Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I've just made some objective markers for bolt action last week, and I had enough fun with it that I wanted to make some more. And the game I just played was Dead Man's Hand, a Wild West game which goes heavily into the movie spaghetti western rather than anything historical. It's fun, is what I'm saying. And my good friend Ratman gave me this set of Wild West basing accessories from TT Combat Scenics. There's cacti, hats, snakes, which I immediately got distracted by, because if I can put one of those snakes on a base, hey look, that's not Scenics anymore, that's a straight up model to game with. But what I really want to do is make an objective marker today, some set dressing. So what would Western folk find important? Water in a desert, obviously, and fences seem to be quite popular. And the old farmstead might be a bit big for an objective marker, but these are all really practical, normal things. What I want is the cool thing from a movie. Ah yes, dynamite. So let's quickly clean up the mould lines and bubble traps. These are pretty well made parts with no casting defects. And we can stick some of it down to a base, and I just have this leftover resin base that I printed a little while ago. I also started with superglue and baking powder, my go-to for sand, but it also makes for a stronger adhesive than superglue by itself. I used one of the big cacti and the dynamite plunger and scattered a few bundles of dynamite around to really sell that over-the-top movie dynamite thing. Not that you can see it because I moved out of the focus of the camera, but I cut a corner off of the plunger's box to mount one of the hats, as if someone had rested their hat against it while they wiped their brow in the hot sun. And you know what, I still have some of those scorpions that I printed all those months ago, so one of those went on as well just for a bit of fun. And with that in place, a little more baking powder to clean it all up and cover the gaps, and it's ready for paint. And the painting was an incredibly simple process for this. I started with a grey prime and a tan base coat through an airbrush and moved on to brushwork. As the cactus is the standout feature and going to be the most distinct colour, I started there. A solid dark green to begin with, and when I looked up reference images for cacti, I had the idea of painting in some stripes in kind of a more cartoony style than realistic. I felt that my light green was a little too bright by itself, and so I wet blended it into the darker green as I went around the model. I quickly achieved a subtle lined effect that works nicely with the sculpted details, and I dotted on some of the clumps of spines that this cactus might have, rather than using any kind of tiny actual spines, which would be very fiddly to fit and very fragile. This just simple dots will have to suffice. The dynamite next, and a nice bright red. In fact, I mixed my red with the tan colour, and I know that I'll be drowning this in a brown wash later on, which will darken and enrich the colour, so I don't mind the kind of desaturated, slightly pink hue that they have at the moment. And with that in mind, the plunger got a dark brown and the hat got a bit of orange with some brown mixed in, and base coating all of these parts differently and then tying them together with a brown wash, well, that's a pretty classic process in the mini painting scene. And whilst I did touch up some of the edges here and there, after the wash, that was pretty much all. But before I forget, I should also paint the snake, which is actually going to be so quick that it took me longer to set up the camera than it did to paint. Again, I used some reference photos from the internet to get a vague feel for how rattlesnakes look. Seemingly common is rich brown colours in patterns down their back. So again, airbrush tan to start. I took the leftover orange from the wet palette and put some splotches down the snake's back, trying to make them roughly oval and each one slightly larger in sequence as I went down the animal. I then took a brown that I had used for the plunger to paint some of the border of the splotches, which quickly became a chevron pointing towards the head. And I also picked out the tail with some tan to ensure that it would be the brightest part of the model, and then the whole thing got doused in that brown wash, which really nicely picked out the detail in the sculpt very nicely. TT Combat did a good job with this set. So what do you think of this quick build and paint of an objective marker and of course the snake? I think they go nicely with my Western models now, just a nice little refreshing project to knock out in an hour or so. But for now, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.